Kinesiology 223, Chapter 12. This presentation is just some side notes regarding some of the breakout boxes we've seen. We've already talked about some of them, but I really like this, and I know you're going to see this somewhere else. The control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. But defining mental toughness, building mental toughness, and the dark side of mental toughness. I thought this was great. You know, you may have some athletes who might not seek out help because to them it will be perceived as a weakness. Or they might try to work through an injury that they shouldn't try to work through because, again, it'll be perceived as a weakness. You know, you may have to guide people along this path to understand that sometimes mental toughness is great, but to a point. I liked this in terms of, you know, just talking through building mental toughness down here. But I will say that, you know, as we talked about in one of our lectures, you'll have students or athletes or student athletes who will come to you who will be more predisposed to being mentally tough than others. It could be their nature or nurture. It could be the one. It could be my one roommate in college who had 4 brothers, if you recall that conversation. Or it could just be how they're wired. You know, some people are just more mentally tough than others, and you have to be able to meet your athletes where they are. I'll get myself out of the way here. And with this, you know, we talked about sports psychology consultants, SPC. I thought this was pretty good. You know, maybe you can take a moment to just read through this and have a little better understanding from the coach and administrator's view. And there's some areas of research in here. Maybe you can look up a couple of these if you're bored. But, you know, I like these in terms of when you have a sports psychology consultant get into the picture, you know, they can talk with the athletes regarding maybe their anxiety, their confidence or concentration, but also they can talk with their coaches regarding their anxiety, their confidence, and concentration. And they can also have conversations with the coaches regarding perhaps issues within the department, their burnout, maybe there's some depression or homesickness if they're out in from another country or from another state and they left their family in another state. And that happens in the college coaching environment where an opportunity will come up and a person who's a coach will leave to go coach at a college in another state and leave the family because the kids are already enrolled in an elementary school. Very common. So, you know, sports psychologists may have interventions with the coaches as well as the athletes, or the athletes as well as the coaches. I thought this was great in terms of different models. And I know I talked a little bit about this in one presentation. I would take a moment to kind of get familiar with, you know, pure performance, focus, inspiration, no pace, right? Between perception, activation, concentration, and execution, and also the 5 R's. Just kind of wrap yourself around this concept because I'm almost certain it ends up on a quiz question or a test question down the road. Mental skills training from sport to business life. I thought this was great. Over here on page was this 284, where they talk about how, you know, you're looking at this from a sports standpoint. That's the lens we're looking through here. But I've mentioned it, you know, in terms of like the business world. Many of these skill sets do transfer, and I like how they kind of break this out here and they talk about a few different aspects of this. And I would spend a little bit of time just reading through that if you have a moment. Let me get myself out of the way here. This is on 287. Effective and ineffective sports performance consultants or sports psychology consultants. And with this, they looked at the different traits. You know, were they accessible? Did they have good rapport? Did they have good knowledge? Were they able to be likable, et cetera? And they had ineffective down here. I thought these were great. And I thought this down here was kind of interesting in terms of it should be noted that the strong interpersonal skills, empathy, approachability, listening, caring, were the most important. So even though you might have the hard skills in terms of psychology, et cetera, it's the soft skills of really being able to interact with people that had the greatest amount of benefit. And it's just, again, it's interesting to me to see how you can have all the hard skills in the world, but if you can't talk and communicate with other people, those are worthless. This is a tool that's provided on page 288 to 289. It's actually on 2 different pages. And what this does is when you use this instrument, you can come up with a plotgram around here and evaluate where the strengths are for your athletes and where the weaknesses are. I don't believe you're going to see this anywhere else, but it's just yet another instrument that can be used to help you evaluate your athletes. I want to throw that in. In terms of table 12.1, when you're doing a subjective versus objective assessment, I thought there was a lot going on here, and I wanted to just take a moment so you can kind of process this. They broke this down into subjective versus objective And say like when you're interviewing and you have a subjective assessment and you're asking questions, you're on the strength of that is you're establishing trust and rapport, and you can have a conversation regarding self-perceptions, beliefs, and attitudes, and you can have more in-depth knowledge about the person's sport and life issues. Whereas some of the limitations are, it has some bias built in there. It might be something where you don't have the actual insight that you'd want because the person either interviewing or the person who's being interviewed just might not have the insight to provide the answers. Whereas when you get down in here to objective assessments, sports specific, you have this different breakout in terms of his matrix with strengths and limitations. So I just want to take a moment to kind of have you guys wrap yourself around this in terms of these are the types of interview questions or observations that they're using. Some are subjective, some are objective, and with each one, you have some have strengths and some have limitations. All right. I just thought that this table had a lot going on. I just want to take a moment for that. Olympic sports psychologist top 10 guide. Read this 100%. This is so on. Mental training can't replace physical training. Absolutely. You got to have physical training. You got to be strong. You got to be explosive, etc. A strong mind may not win an Olympic medal, but a weak mind will lose you one. Oh my God. Talk about nuggets of wisdom here. Take a moment and read through these and just kind of process them. I think they're wonderful. Developing and displaying expertise. Experts versus non-experts. Now, I will tell you that, like, you look at Gladwell had a book where he talked about 10,000 hours of practice and why people were more successful than others, and that was the key takeaway, was Malcolm Gladwell's point that the people who had 10,000 hours of practice were more successful in their sporting and life endeavors, whatever it may be. But it's the concept of having deliberate practice and not just practice for the sake of practice. When you go to practice, you want to be very deliberate and precise about what you do, and that takes you from being like a neophyte newbie and brings you more into the expert realm as an athlete. And I would say even as a coach, you have to evaluate this and you have to evaluate the concept of being very deliberate in your implementation in practice and not just have practice for the sake of practice. And further, you have these principles of applying deliberate practice, the acronym experts. Great. It's pretty relative and relevant, to be quite honest. It's both relative and relevant, so it's pretty new. But I would also state that when you look at this, there's ample research you can look into in terms of deliberate practice and the efficacy of deliberate practice versus just throwing a ball in a basketball court and having your athletes go play. So with that, guys, I just wanted to shine a light to those little breakout boxes. I thought there was some value there. And I know some of the test questions will have there's a few test questions that are relative to those. So take a moment, just kind of read through those and get comfortable with them. All right, guys, thank you so much. I'm moving on to the next chapter.